Yesterday in the United States Senate, Senator Ted Cruz squared off with Senator Spartacus. Now, we would call Cory Booker Senator Spartacus just as a derisive joke to make fun of him and mock him and ridicule him. You remember during the Kavanaugh hearings where he said, "This is my Spartacus moment." The guy's a joke. The guy's a punchline. He's a grandstanding, shallow imbecile. That's what we would say to describe Senator Cory Booker. What was remarkable in this exchange between this intellectual giant, Ted Cruz, and this midget, Cory Booker, is that by the time it was over, even Senator Cruz called him Spartacus. Wait for it. It's worth waiting for. Watch this for a moment.
We indulge you every moment.
I appreciate that act of generosity. It's just something you said that I think is actually dangerous and should be addressed, and you're welcome. But when Judge Anderol was killed in New Jersey, the Republican colleagues in the Senate, their outpouring of support, their outpouring of concern, they're willing to work together on a bipartisan bill was extraordinary. It shows the truth of this institution that despite some of the fiery rhetoric that you were sowing, we're really a bipartisan, working bipartisanship. Cornyn and Coons, after the incidents you're talking about, got together and actually passed a bill to better protect our Supreme Court justices, many of whom are friends of ours. You know, Gorsuch and I disagree on a lot of stuff. I knew his wife before he did. We studied together at Oxford. This implication that there was silence when there were threats on their people's houses is absolutely absurd. I remember the rhetoric and the comments, the concern from Coons. I actually distinctly remember you, Chairman, on more than once condemning those attacks on Republican-appointed jurists. To say things like that feeds just the partisanship in this institution and feeds the fiery rhetoric. And it's just plain not true. It's just plain not true. And I think you know that, but we can pull from the record from my colleagues in real time, literally days afterwards, condemning it. There's a lot of substantive things to say here, but to think that the lack of humanity when people's homes are being threatened was not in existence, I think that's unfair and really concerns me that you would say that in the way that you did.
Wow, that was deep and meaningful and powerful and sincere. And, of course, a pile of horse. He's teeing up Cruz, and you can tell there's like a moment here where Ted Cruz is like, how hard should I go? And you'll see exactly how hard he goes. But there's one thing here that the left does all the time, and it drives me up the wall. And usually this is a social media thing that people do when they're commenting and going back and forth on X. But he just did it to Ted Cruz's face, and it's insulting, it's patronizing, and it's disgusting. Did you hear what he said? He said, you know, what you're saying is just not true, but I think you know that. That's the worst. Because what he's saying is, you're smarter than this, but you're lying because, well, you just have to say this sort of thing to appease Trump or to appease the MAGA types. Yeah, I know. It's like this condescending, patronizing sort of, I know you're smart enough to know better, and I'm just calling you out. You're just saying this because you've got to appeal to the lowest common denominator. And it's so disgusting, especially coming from an intellectual midget like Cory Booker, who lies on a regular basis. So let's see how Ted Cruz handles this.
Well, I thank my colleague from New Jersey. I will note, as John Adams observed, that facts are stubborn things. And it is existing federal law, 18 U.S.C. section 1507, that makes it a crime to protest at a judge's home. And the law provides whoever with the intent of interfering with, obstructing, or impeding the administration of justice, or with the intent or of influencing any judge, juror, witness, or court officer in the discharge of his duty, pickets or parades in or near a building housing a court of the United States, in or near a building or residence occupied or used by such judge, juror, witness, or court officer, or with such intent uses any sound truck or similar device or resorts to any other demonstration in or near any such building or residence, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 1 year or both. That is federal criminal law. Night after night after night, angry mobs were outside the Supreme Court justices' homes. And in the entire course of it, the Biden Justice Department prosecuted nobody. We had the Attorney General sitting at that table, and multiple Republican senators asked him, why are you not enforcing the law? What they are doing is a crime. And my friend from New Jersey said, it is a lie to say we, the Democrats, condone this. I would challenge, my friend, find a single Democrat senator on this committee holding the Attorney General to account for not enforcing this law. I was here at those hearings, and I do not recall a single Democrat senator saying to the Attorney General, you should arrest these people who are violating the law. You should protect the judges. I agree that there was general language against violence, but not a single Democrat senator that I ever saw in this committee was willing to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland to account for flagrantly disregarding the federal criminal law, because the Biden administration agreed with the protesters and I think wanted those justices harassed at their home.
I really appreciate that you've now shifted the accusation you made earlier. Your accusation was that we were silent in the face of protests at Supreme Court justices' homes. Again, we joined together in a bipartisan way, not only to condemn that, but to pass legislation to extend round-the-clock security protection, literally days. It was introduced May 5th, passed the Senate in a bipartisan fashion on May 9th. So if you're saying that we didn't criticize
Merrick Garland, did the Biden DOJ arrest a single person under this law?
You are now changing the
No, that is what I said. That is what I said.
Again, I'll pull the record.
Did the Biden DOJ arrest even one?
Again,
the answer is no.
My point to you is the accusation that the Democrats on this committee do not care about the safety
so let me ask
of federal judges.
All right, I real fast. I just want to make sure that you see what's happening here, because Cruz said you were silent in the face of all these protests, and Cory Booker's only response is, "What are you talking about? We passed a law." And yet, of course, the law was never enforced. The Attorney General, Merrick Garland, under President Joe Biden, never actually did anything about that law, never arrested anybody, and Cory Booker said nothing about that. Cory Booker didn't say, hey, dude, Merrick Garland, come on, you're making us look bad. We just passed this law, arrest somebody. He never said that. Of course he didn't. So Cory Booker's allowed to say, hey, we put out a memo. We joined with you in a bipartisan fashion so that I could cover my ass when I want to run for office. And we passed a law, but if you don't do anything to actually enforce the law, like the border, then it means nothing. And this is exactly why Ted Cruz is doing this. It's like, enough of your talking, enough of your giving a speech for 24 hours on the floor, Cory Booker, that actually does nothing. Passing a law means nothing if you're not going to hold the executive branch accountable for enforcing that law. And so Cruz gets in him on this and goes hard, and it's great because we're done with the crap about, oh, of course I did something. I had a strongly worded memo, and we had a hearing about it. No, do something. Actually do something.
I did not interrupt you, sir. I would appreciate if you let me finish. I am sick and tired of hearing the kind of heated partisan rhetoric, which is one of the reasons why we have such divisions in this country. The attacks we see from the President of the United States of America trolling and dragging judges through is what we should be talking about, that puts people in danger. I'm simply taking issue with the claim that you made at the top that people on the Democratic side of the aisle do not care about the safety and the security of judges, and said nothing. You said we were silent after people's houses were protested. That is a patent lie, sir. We were not silent. We took action. We joined in a bipartisan way to protect those judges, as was done in a bipartisan way to protect a New Jersey judge after their horrific attack at their home. So I see you now trying to shift the debate to whether we talk to an attorney general. I'm simply taking issue with this accusation that somehow we Democrats are so bad because we don't call out threats to our to our judicial colleagues. And that is wrong. You could change the argument now that you want, but what you said was patently not true and was in fact a patent lie.
So I do enjoy the fact that my colleague from New Jersey raises his voice and says it's a patent lie, and says he's doing so in defense of lowering the rhetoric. There is some irony to doing those two together. I'll point out that in the entire course of those remarks, Senator Booker did not dispute the central point I made, which is the Biden Justice Department arrested 0 people, prosecuted 0 people for violating the criminal law, and every Democrat senator on this committee was silent about it. And this was an ongoing pattern for months. And I would note also that the senator from New Jersey clutched his pearls about language threatening judges, and yet I do not recall a single Democrat senator of this committee saying a word when Chuck Schumer went to the steps of the Supreme Court and threatened the safety of the Supreme Court justices by name, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, and he said, "You have unleashed the whirlwind and you will pay the price." And not a single Democrat senator had a word to say about this. And so their outrage is selective. And I will give my colleague from New Jersey a chance to just answer a simple yes/no question. Should the Biden Justice Department have enforced the criminal law against protesting at a justice's home? Yes or no?
So the rank hypocrisy of Chuck Schumer apologizing the next day and you holding that standard for him and not for your president, who you actually rightfully described when you were running against him in a primary. I would love to run those tapes of how you perfectly talked about the danger of our president and his rhetoric. But now you are failing, in fact, blind to the very things you're accusing Chuck Schumer of. I don't think Donald Trump would know an apology if it hit him in the head. Never has said apologizing. So again, you are very, very, sir, very, very deep into the waters of hypocrisy in your criticisms of Chuck Schumer.
So let the record reflect that Spartacus did not answer the question and did not tell us whether the criminal law should be enforced, because he knows the answer is yes. And he knows that the Biden Department of Justice was being wildly political and partisan in refusing to enforce the law because they disagreed with the Supreme Court justices' rulings.
Let the record reflect. And now the Senate record actually does have Senator Ted Cruz referring to Cory Booker as Spartacus. One wonders if all the Republicans there in the cloakroom behind closed doors call him Spartacus behind his back. And in the heat of the moment, Cruz just let it slip, or whether he just did that on purpose. Let me tell you something about Ted Cruz. He went to Harvard Law School, graduated in the top of his class. Alan Dershowitz, before he actually got red-pilled and became sort of the quasi-conservative type that you sort of see him today. I'm not sure where he is politically, to tell you the truth. But at the time, he was firmly aligned with the Democrats as a liberal, legendary law professor at Harvard Law. And he gave an interview about Ted Cruz when Ted Cruz was running for the Senate. I want to say this was 2010. And he said in the interview that Ted Cruz was the smartest student he ever had in any class the entire time he taught law at Harvard Law School. And the person who was interviewing him, I remember, said, "Well, is that right? Because didn't you also have Barack Obama, who at the time was the president of the United States? Didn't you also have Barack Obama, who was the president of the Harvard Law Review? Wasn't he also in your class?" And Professor Dershowitz says, yes, I did have Barack Obama in my class. And the interviewer said, "Well, what did you think of Barack Obama as a law student?" And Dershowitz just looked at the interviewer and said, "Ted Cruz was the smartest student I ever had in any of my law classes at Harvard Law." And he just left it at that. This hearing, by the way, was a subcommittee that Ted Cruz, Senator Cruz, had set up specifically to focus on the judicial branch and how the federal judges have been obstructing the Trump administration's agenda these first few months of his second term. And the Democrats brought up a witness, which was a mistake, because also sitting on this committee was one of our favorites, Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana, and you know how good he is. This is a quick clip, but it's worth your wait. How did Senator Kennedy handle the Democrats' witness on the judiciary?
Do any of you think that nationwide or universal injunctions are not being abused?
I'm not sure what if I may, Senator, I'm not sure what the time horizon of the question is. I don't think that there could be good faith disagreements about the correctness of some of them, but I have not seen in the last 4 months abuse. No.
I've read your stuff and I've read your writings. I don't want to get bogged down with this, but I have little respect for your opinion because I've read your stuff. When someone is in the White House that you agree with and someone gets a universal injunction against him, you don't like universal injunctions. You called them judges acting like they're politicians in robes and judges looking like crass political actors. But now that President Trump's in the White House, who you dislike, you think that universal injunctions taste like pumpkin pie. So I have to discount what you say because I think you act on your political beliefs. And I worry that that's what you're teaching your kids.
God, there's something so rewarding and cathartic about moments like that, where he just asks a random question to all the witnesses. This one decides to step up, and he just happens to have a piece of paper with her past record and performance on the very issue that she's now seemingly really concerned about. That's beautiful. Love Kennedy, love Cruz, and this will go down in history. Honestly, Cruz is a hero for life for me, for looking Cory Booker in the face and calling him Spartacus in the middle of a hearing. God bless that man.